Hi, I'm Mason Duchatschek, and I'm here with Cindy Miles, who is the president and CEO of the Kansas Nonprofit Chamber of Commerce. I'm very, very excited to get to sit down and interview her today because she has a vast range of experience and knowledge as it relates to nonprofits that I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone that's got better credentials and better experience. And I really appreciate you sitting down with me today.
You bet. Thank you for asking.
For best I can tell, you've worked with, literally helped over several hundred nonprofits start from scratch,
yes,
and become sustainable.
Yes.
And there are a lot of things that go on between where you start and becoming sustainable that aren't apparent to everyone outside of the nonprofit world. So hopefully we can get some insights from you on how that process happens. But if you don't mind, could you tell me a little bit about what you think are some of the biggest challenges related to, let's say, fundraising, specifically if you're targeting business donors or corporate donors?
Yeah, so I think, quite honestly, some of the biggest challenges are when you talk about businesses and then funding nonprofit organizations, really have to do with the fact that they don't really have a good grasp, I think, for the most part, on the impact that nonprofit organizations have. And while we have a lot of small businesses that give lots of little things to nonprofit organizations, and some big businesses that give bigger gifts to nonprofit organizations, overall, I think there's generally, in my opinion, a consensus that people just don't understand the impact of nonprofit organizations overall. And I see that in conversations that occur in the community. So let's say business leaders are talking about quality of life, and they think about that in relation to workforce or housing that's available or the streets that we drive on, but they don't think about it in the perspective of we're trying to recruit a woman to come here and take an executive position. She has a child that has disabilities. She wants to know what kind of services are available for her child. Or if we're trying to recruit companies to the area, they certainly want to know what kind of parks and recreation system do we have. And certainly, just like here in Wichita, we have a Parks and Rec Foundation that raises money to build better parks. We have a library foundation that, built a big library, big new library that we have downtown. So they just don't really realize, I think, the impact overall that nonprofits have on quality life in our communities.
It's funny you say that because I have visited the libraries here in Wichita, and I was blown away by the a range of amenities that were available. Like literally they have a video studio room with green screens
Yes.
and lights so that entrepreneurs can go create content. They had conference rooms with AV technology that rivaled anything you would find in most nice corporations. And if people don't know about them, they can't be taken advantage of and used. And that's a very good example. How do nonprofits, what advice or guidance or tips do you have for nonprofits to get the message out about the work that they do and the value of it in the community?
So I'm constantly promoting nonprofit organizations, not throwing data out all the time, but actually telling the stories of the people that they serve and the impact that they're making in the communities or the lives of individuals. I think if they don't tell their stories about the work that they're doing or the people that they're impacting, I don't think that really has the same impact as if they're just talking data. And again, as we both know, in fundraising, there are some people that, the pure data will
Sure.
make a difference to, but when I talk to nonprofit organizations about diversifying their funding and talk about, the 2021 giving report and how much money was given by individuals, so 67% of the $485 billion that was given by individuals, those are the people that are truly going to be impacted by the stories that you tell.
Sure. So what tips or strategies, assume you have a great story to tell, but how do you get an audience with the people who can make good donations and can contribute and support nonprofits? What tips do you have for donor access? Because you can have a great story, but if you can't get your audience,
that's correct.
you're gonna fall short.
When I work with nonprofit organizations, I encourage them to build a good, strong donor database of your individual donors, and that can be hundreds, thousands of people that they can solicit in a number of different ways. But certainly with those major donors, those whether it's individuals or businesses that are going to give a bigger gift, I encourage them to try to put together a list of at least 100 organizations and narrow that down to 10 when they're starting off, and really work on cultivating those relationships. And I teach them how to cultivate relationships by, having lunch, having coffee, giving them information about the organization, providing updates. But really it's about building those relationships with those major donors specifically.
With how about competition? I mean, like what tips do you have for organizations who are trying to build a database or who are trying to tell their story, and as soon as they get started, like, well, we already gave to this cause, or we already give to that cause? I mean, what
So
tips?
Number one, I tell them not to give up. I always tell them no often means no, not right now, and to kind of check back in with that potential donor about when they can get back with them. I mean, most donors that are going to give major gifts aren't going to give somebody a gift the first time that they solicit them, or they're, I discourage them from making an appointment before they've built that relationship and going in and making a big ask. You really do have to cultivate those relationships.
Okay. What, as it relates to cultivating relationships, I mean, where do you suggest someone start? I mean, if they're, like, obviously you've worked with people from the very beginning,
yes,
just starting their nonprofits. Where do you start cultivating relationships?
So identifying those top 10 individuals. And I'm going to tell you, we have a Wichita Business Journal book of lists. So I encourage them to look through that book of lists, look at who the top employers are, look at who the top banks are, look at, the different things related to the list. And of course it depends on what they're doing. So I encourage them to do that. I encourage them to watch to see what businesses, what individuals are sponsoring what events, because that will give you an idea of what those people, those businesses or whatever, what they're passionate about, and try to tie into those things. I even tell them to, if they're at the Humane Society, to check the donor wall and see who's donating to the organization, or if they're different places and they happen to notice that there's a donor wall, to certainly go over that donor wall and kind of see who's on there. And in addition, I encourage them to pull up 990s. I'm trying to teach nonprofit organizations how to use the 990s to go find out who the biggest donors are from different organizations. So it really requires some homework in order for them to identify who they ought to be cultivating relationships with.
That donor wall is a good idea. Like the YMCA is
yes.
two blocks from here.
Yeah.
And I did what you suggested, and I counted over $500,000 worth of donations just from at minimum,
yes,
just from the names that were the businesses that were on the wall. So
yep.
that wasn't lost on me.
Yeah, good.
With how about competition? Like, how do you suggest that nonprofit executive directors or those in charge of development position themselves or their organization to get a piece of a pie, for
yep.
lack of a better, when there's so many other good causes, legitimately so many other good causes out there?
There are, yeah. So again, those stories, but also telling why they're unique. What do they do that's a little bit different? Whether it's the way that they serve people, whether it's their museum that maybe is unique. What is it that makes them really different and stand out from the other, what the other nonprofit organizations are doing? It's what I try to encourage them to do. And in the work that I've done with startups over the years, I always have conversations about who's doing what in the area that they're going to serve, and is there an opportunity to partner with that organization. Same with grant funding. I mean, if you could partner with an organization on a grant, and I encourage that on an ongoing basis, or any kind of other project, I encourage partnerships and collaboration. I think we don't see enough of that. I think we spend so much time competing with another that working together makes our nonprofit organizations stronger. And so I think that's one of the ways that you can overcome some of that competitiveness. And I tell people, here in the state of Kansas, we have 17,000 501c3s, and then we have an additional 4,000 that are operating as nonprofits that don't have a 501c, but they operate under an Articles of Incorporation with the state. So they're generally small, they're sporting clubs or cheerleading squads or something like that they don't need those tax deductible donations. But certainly they've got to find ways to either join in with the competition or stand out from the competition.
Well, I'm going to plug your organization here, if you don't mind. But she practices what she preaches. Like I went to your site and I noticed that you have collaborations and agreements with organizations to serve your members and get them discounts that they wouldn't have gotten otherwise.
Yes.
I mean, that's very creative, and again, she practices what she preaches. So that's why I'm sitting here talking to you. How do you feel about, particularly in the corporate donor area, how do you feel about how changes in economic circumstances or the economic environment affect donations, and what can a nonprofit do to shield themselves from those ups and downs?
Yeah, the past few years have been, of course, really hard for nonprofit organizations, and I know they've been hard for businesses as well. But nonprofit organizations, for the most part, we can't just say, okay, we're going to raise the price of our bread to compensate for that. And so I think, encouraging nonprofit organizations certainly to diversify their funding. We have a lot of nonprofit organizations that are so focused on grant funding. And again, going back to that USA Giving report from 2021, only 20% of funding is provided from grants. And so I encourage going back to that relationship building, whether it's building relationships with the businesses, building relationships with the individual donors, the major donors, figuring out how you can hook them per se, I think is not only been critical, will continue to be critical. And, I saw that organizations that were heavily reliant on grant funding, heavily reliant on event funding, were really crushed during the pandemic. And so I've been doing a lot more work to talk to nonprofit organizations about that diversification of funding, and working with them through a spreadsheet on reviewing all the different ways they can bring in funding, and making sure they're not just focused on that grant funding or even that event funding. So often we get caught up in doing events as nonprofit organizations, but really not accurately measuring the ROI on those, because we're not counting the staff time to put on those big events. Unless you're really just hitting it out of the ballpark with an event, they're really not as profitable as some nonprofit organizations seem to believe. So back to building relationships, I think that's the key to everything.
And the thing that I'm reading between the lines here also is not having all your eggs in one basket.
Yes.
Because, if you've got a handful of donors who are of a particular political persuasion, and tides turn, and all of a sudden you don't say something or you don't do something that is in complete alignment with what that organization does or doesn't believe, then that source could dry up.
That's correct.
So having all your eggs in one basket might be that.
Yep.
That's what I was hearing between the lines.
Yes.
She was more tactful than me.
Yes. No, you're right. You're absolutely right.
But, so first of all, thank you for sitting down and visit with me.
You bet.
If there is, how would tell us? So this is your chance to shamelessly plug your organization.
Sure.
Because it's good.
Right.
So feel free. Tell people a little bit about the commercial about what it is that you do and how you help nonprofits.
Certainly.
And I'll be sure to get the word out as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Kansas Nonprofit Chamber was formed in 2005, and we serve nonprofit organizations across the state. Actually, we're a membership organization, so we not only have nonprofit members, we have business members, we have individual members, but we're really, again, working to create strong, sustainable nonprofits across the state of Kansas. And whether that's teaching them how boards should operate, teaching new board members how boards should operate. So we, people don't grow up learning how to serve on a nonprofit board, and we see a lot of our board members aging out. So, things like Board University teach people how to serve on nonprofit boards, or whether they're looking for resources for executive directors, information on grants, grant writing. So we have a wide variety of training that we do. We do consulting, board assessments, strategic planning, in all different areas related to nonprofit organizations. And, we do things like our board member match-up program. So we're helping young professionals get onto nonprofit boards, as well as retired people or people that, are a certain point in a career, they feel like they can serve on a nonprofit board. But certainly engaging those young professionals is a focus for us.
Sure, because not all donations are financial. Some of them can be time.
That's right. They can. So we do a lot of different work in a lot of different areas. Certainly we are encouraging collaboration amongst nonprofit organizations. That is a big push for us. And then the nonprofit startup work that we do, we've worked with organizations across the state of Kansas, again, hundreds of those organizations. And we've reached outside of Kansas as well, because we have people that they happen upon us, and they might be from Chicago or Minnesota or Oklahoma or wherever,
Sure.
And they're just looking for some help with a nonprofit startup, which is it's kind of challenging. While I've run both nonprofits and for-profit businesses and mentor both, certainly the nonprofit startup help is unique, because it's a little bit difficult to find somebody that will help you. You can reach out to a lot of your traditional business startup organizations, and they'll tell you they don't do that work. And so I think that fills a real gap. And then we have this building that we're in, the 501c Foundry. We house a few small nonprofit organizations to help grow and incubate some small nonprofit organizations, and we can help them with resources. If they need guidance with board meetings or whatever it is that we need, that they need, we can certainly be there to support them and encourage them. And hopefully we'll grow them up, and they'll move out and add additional employees, and we'll move other small startups in here.
And if someone wanted to reach out to you, the phone number, website?
Yeah. So ksnonprofitchamber.org is our website, and our phone number 316-440-6744.
Thank you so much for your time and your knowledge. Really appreciate it. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. I appreciate it.